You know, for many of us, this sort of clunky, charming bit of German engineering takes us right back to Mexico. In fact, it may have been the vehicle that took you to Mexico in the first place. But back in the 60s and 70s, these babies were everywhere in Mexico. Well, they still are, but back in those days, behind the wheels, windows down, breeze blowing through the hair, was a whole new generation of American tourists. And as ambassadors, we might have looked a little bit peculiar. In fact, there's a picture of me in my van taking off wide-eyed. What was I thinking about? Well, I remember one thing, that I had a hunch that when I crossed that border, I wasn't going to be in Kansas anymore. Well, or in my case, Oklahoma. But after a number of years of traveling around, I realized that there was an enormous border between the U.S. and Mexico. And it wasn't just the Rio Grande, but we'd gotten our image of Mexico from movies. And they were shot in backlots in Hollywood or maybe in Puerto Vallarta. And Mexican food, where I grew up, all we knew was one color, one texture, one flavor, and it included canned tamales. But then, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, a bunch of us, we headed out in search of the real Mexico. And you know, we found it. You know, we found an amazing, vibrant, and varied culture. And that just sort of started a cultural exchange, and it's one that's continued on till today. And you know, wherever I go in the United States today, I can find some vestige of the real flavor of Mexico. Well, not exactly. You see, America's been having this love affair with the giant burrito for years. Mexican, right? You'd be pretty hard-pressed to find a burrito as big as your head in Mexico. Or any burrito at all, for that matter. It seems like that the burrito was invented here in the United States. Same goes for nachos and fajitas. So it seems like as Mexican food made its way north, something changed in the translation. But let's just do that whole thing in reverse. Say there's this guy from Chicago and he's living in Mexico and gets kind of homesick. Well, he could go to practically any Mexican city and get a slice of something definitively American. Well, not exactly. Now, you see, they think of pizza here in Mexico as American food. They flock to all the fast food franchises, just like people do all over the globe. But here in Mexico, things are a little different when you go into those places. For instance, on the pizza, you could order roasted poblanos or smoky chipotle chilies or jalapenos or chorizo sausage. In fact, one of the fast food franchises a few years ago tried a new campaign they called McPastor. Now, what it was a pork burger with a little pineapple on it. They were trying to emulate the very famous tacos al pastor, that spit-roasted chili-marinated pork with the slice of grilled pineapple. So famous here in Mexico City. I don't think the transition worked very well. So if you're looking for real authenticity, you might have a pretty long journey. But if you just want a quick bite, how about a little bit of chorizo and jalapeno pizza? One of the first lessons that I brought back from Mexico was about salsa, about roasted tomatillo salsa, what they call salsa verde there. Well, now it's gonna be a revelation, just dipping a corn tortilla chip into it. But you know, it can also be the essence of a meal, working its way into and onto a whole variety of dishes. It's because the basic ingredients have so much to offer. I mean, the little tomatillo itself, I mean, that's what we call it in English, is tomatillo. In Mexico, most places they call it tomate verde, or green tomato. It's really not related to a tomato very closely at all. You can see it's got this little papery husk on the outside of it. That's the way it'll come when you buy it in the grocery store. You peel that little papery husk, you can see it's kind of got a sticky substance that keeps that husk attached to the little fruit there. Once you've gotten it peeled, then you need to rinse them to get that little sticky substance off. Comes right off under cold water. And then slide them right underneath a preheated broiler. And let them roast there, because that'll concentrate their flavor and sweeten them up as they sort of blacken and blister. 5 minutes on one side, flip them over, 5 minutes on the other side. They'll lose a little of their juice into the pan and it'll start to caramelize, which just underscores that sweet and tart contrast. Now, the second ingredient that's so great in the tomatillo salsa is the serrano chili. Spicy, bitey, kind of a grassy green flavor that's the perfection of green chili. So I'm going to roast those too, but I'm not going to roast them alongside those tomatillos under the broiler. I'm going to put them into an ungreased little skillet there over medium heat and just let them roast there, turning them for about 10 minutes, but they're going to need a little bit of company. So I'm going to put some garlic in there. These are just cloves of unpeeled garlic to lay right beside the chili serrano. Let them roast there 10 to 15 minutes, turning them every once in a while. They'll blacken and blister, but they'll get soft and they'll get sweet. After the roasted ingredients have cooled off, they're ready to be blended into our roasted tomatillo salsa. The garlic, of course, has got to get peeled out of that little papery skin, and you can see how easily it just pops right out of the skin after it's cooled off. And I'm going to turn the food processor on, drop the garlic in. These roasted serrano chilies, see what they look like and how they get little blackened spots on them? Well, those will drop right in there as well. We're just trying to start the chopping of those, and then I'm going to take the top of it off and scrape in the roasted tomatillos. Now you can see how they've blackened a little bit on the top, and see that wonderful juice that's there. You don't want to miss any of that, because that's really delicious. So right into the bowl this base will go. I'll encourage you that if you like to make tomatillo salsa in big batches, make it to this stage and then finish it with a little bit of fresh cilantro and some white onion, just little bits at a time when you want to serve it. So I've got my chopped white onion here, and I'm going to rinse it off. That's to take away some of that bite of the onion, and it also crisps up the texture of the onion. Shake off the excess water, and then we'll put that right in on top of our roasted tomatillo garlic serrano puree. On top of that goes the chopped cilantro and a spoon of salt. Now, there's another ingredient to season this one, and that's a little bit of sugar. That helps to just balance the natural acidity of the tomatillos. And we'll stir that all up. Now, it's a little thick at this point, so I'm going to add to it just a little bit of water, stir a little bit of water into it. And you might think that this is just begging for a corn tortilla chip. But you know what? I want to introduce it to another homegrown Mexican favorite. Coincidence or not, as folks started driving those VW buses back from Mexico, Americans started experimenting a little bit with this, the avocado. Not surprisingly, it started showing up in a whole new wave of health food restaurants and salads, on sandwiches, and of course, in that rising star dip, guacamole. Now, the scientists tell us that the avocado is native here to Mexico, that it spread from here into Central and South America, then into the Caribbean. And of course, those young explorers back in the 1960s weren't the first Americans to experience the avocado. In fact, another ponytailed guy, George Washington, back in 1751, went to Barbados, and he wrote back about the abundance of the ago-vago pears, which I think is what they called the avocado down there. Well, anyway, a hybridized version of the avocado, it's a cross between the Mexican and the Central American varieties. It finally took root in California. They call it the Hass avocado, and it's that familiar pebbly-skinned dark avocado that you find in all the supermarkets. Okay, now for a little bit of avocado mystery. In French, it's called avocado. In Spain, where the avocado probably first landed from the New World, it's called abogado. And in both of those languages, those two words mean lawyer. What's that all about? Is it because avocados make a particularly convincing case? Is it because people are always arguing over avocados? Maybe it's because avocados are just so expensive. Well, actually, abogado and avocado, all three probably derive from an innocent attempt to phonetically translate from the original Aztec name for the fruit, aguacate, which that guac in the middle is where we get our guac, which translates into guacamole. You start making the guacamole by opening an avocado, run the knife around the pit, twist the two sides apart like that, and then scrape the flesh and make a kind of coarse puree, and then add about a cupful of our roasted tomatillo salsa. A few tablespoons, big tablespoons of that'll do it. And then mix that in with a sprinkling of salt. Now, one of the great things about guacamole made with tomatillos is that the tanginess adds a real zip, and it also keeps those avocados from turning dark. Garnish it with a little white onion and chopped cilantro. Boy, a little corn chip. Never had it so good, but I've got better things, bigger things in store for that roasted tomatillo salsa. Now, if you went to Mexico in a VW bus, the chances are you brought home a pair of these, huaraches, rustic sandals, handmade, tire tread bottom, simple, unpretentious, cheap. The hippie's dream. And as people started carrying them back across the border, well, they just caught on like wildfire. And with the embroidered shirt and the backpack and the jeans, they kind of became a counterculture uniform. But you know, huaraches have actually had a role in Mexican culture too, mostly as a symbol of class divisions. There's old expressions in Mexico like, just because I'm wearing huaraches doesn't mean that I'm a grave digger, underscoring the fact that huaraches have been a symbol of the peasant class. College students, back in the 60s, mostly the sons and daughters of the privileged class, they started dressing like the college students north of the border. And speaking of college students, why, that just brings us right back to pizza. What is it about a crispy crust and a variety of spicy toppings that can really satisfy a powerful craving? I don't know, but it certainly seems to be universal, which of course brings us back to huaraches. Huaraches. Food that's named after footwear. But just check it out. It's simple, unpretentious, and of course made in the shape of the sole of a sandal. But the really cool thing about huaraches is that they can be made to fit a variety of appetites. In some places in Mexico, they make them small. You could call them petite. But here in Mexico City, they make them downright Shaquille O'Neal size. Now, the way that you make the huaraches is to fill a ball of that fresh corn masa with some black beans, and then press it out into that traditional sole shape, and then lay it right on the griddle to let it crisp on both sides before you choose your toppings. But we're making homemade Chicago huaraches, or is that pizza? Both of them are soul food no matter how you spell soul. And Lainey and I have decided to do a little cultural exchange. That pizza sauce that you find on practically every Italian American pizza, well, how about if we exchange that for some of our roasted tomatillo salsa? And the canvas, the crust, are we going to stick with the classic corn masa oval-shaped huarache? Or are we going to go for the venerable wheat flour pizza crust? Well, I think in the spirit of experimentation, we should do both. And we should start with the corn masa crust for the huaraches. Now, this is the fresh masa that's used for making corn tortillas. It comes unsalted, and you just mix a little salt in it to give it a little bit of flavor. And you want to take a nugget that's about the size of a golf ball. Now, press a well in the middle of it. And then you want to fill it just like they did in Mexico with a little pureed black beans. I've just taken a can of black beans here and put them in the food processor. And you want to put about a teaspoon of those beans right in the middle. Now that we want to cover up completely, enclose completely, and then roll into a cylinder about 5 inches long. We're going to press it out in just an everyday tortilla press that's been lined with plastic, heavy plastic. Lay it right down on one of the sheets of plastic and then put the other sheet in place. Lay the top down and give it a very gentle press, not too hard there. Then flip it all the way around and give it another press and then unmold it. And there we have our Chicago huarache. Not as big as the ones that they have in Mexico, but I think for most home cooks that'll do great. A griddle that's already been heated to medium, you could use an ungreased skillet. We'll bake it for a couple of minutes on one side, flip it over, and it'll bake 2 more minutes on the other. Now to make the pizza dough, you start by pouring about 1.3 cups of warm water into the food processor, along with a packet of yeast and about a tablespoon of sugar. Let that sit for about 10 minutes or so. The yeast will become very active and get all foamy on top. Into the foamy yeast mixture goes about a tablespoon of olive oil and a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to put in 3 2/3 cups of flour and about 1/3 cup of cornmeal. Now put the top on and we'll let the machine run until it becomes a ball. That's all the kneading that I really give my pizza dough. Seems to work out really well too. And then put that all right back on top. We're gonna cover this up. I've got my pizza dough made, pretty simple one at that. Got my roasted tomatillo salsa. Lainey's got some chorizo sausage she's fried here, radishes, 3 different kinds of cheese, and just about an hour for this pizza dough for it to sort of rise, doubling in its size, and we'll be ready to finish our dishes, won't we? Hey, what do you think if we grill these pizzas?
Can we finish the huaraches outside too?
I think we'll figure out a way. Why don't we go outside and start setting up? Now the dough is risen, and then I cut it into 4 pieces, and now I'm rolling the pieces out into little ovals that are about 10 inches long and about 5 or so inches wide. We want to make sure to get them looking pretty good because this is what the end result of our pizzas is going to look like. Now once that's rolled out like that, I'm going to transfer that over near the grill. Now I'm going to spray it with a little oil so that it won't stick it all. And then I've got the grill heated to medium. I'm going to put it oil side down on the grill, spray it with a little more oil on the top here for when we flip it. And now, Lainey, you're on. Now on this other end of the grill here, we have a griddle, again heated over medium heat. I'm going to pour a little bit of oil on that. And Lainey, you can put a couple of those griddle baked huaraches on there to finish them. Just lay it right on top of the oil there. That's great. See how it starts to sizzle already? So it's going to crisp up nicely underneath. Now we're going to let these cook on the griddle for, I'd say probably 2 or 3 more minutes until everything gets completely crispy and browned underneath. Now the pizza's ready to turn. Lainey, why don't you turn the huaraches? Very beautiful. And now it's time to put our toppings on. We're both going to start with that delicious green salsa to put over the top of it. Smear that on in a nice, even, light layer. Unusual to think of as a pizza topping, but boy, is it good. And now some grilled red onions. They'll add a caramely sweetness to everything. And now goat cheese for a creamy freshness. Taking a variety of influences and creating something altogether new from them is pretty much the story of Mexico. there's examples of it everywhere, but nowhere more graphic than right here in Mexico City at the Plaza de las Tres Culturas, the Plaza of the Three Cultures. Now, one of those cultures, the Mexicas, created this great ceremonial center. They called it Tlatelolco. And when the Spaniards arrived here in the early 1500s, they saw this great marketplace. And they were amazed by its size, by its organization, by its cleanliness, and by the variety of goods that were being sold. In fact, Hernán Cortés, that great conquistador, he wrote home saying that there wasn't anything even half this big in Spain. Over 60,000 people came into this plaza to trade every day. Well, now, unfortunately, those two cultures weren't going to just remain trading partners. And in fact, right in this very location, on August the 13th, 1521, Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor of that great pre-Columbian civilization, was defeated. The Spaniards quickly conquered the indigenous culture, even taking the rubble from that great ceremonial center to build their churches with. They colonized the area with people from the Old World, who of course had their own influences. But it was the third culture to arise here that was the most important. It not only adapted the ancient and the colonial, but it wove in influences from Europe and Asia and Africa. And in the process, it created Mexico, modern Mexico, a blend of cultures in one distinct, unique, and unforgettable country.
Oh, it goes over my huaraches and some radishes.
And on my pizza, I'm gonna sprinkle a good topping of Parmesan cheese, and how about a couple of sprigs of cilantro? So maybe we created something brand new out of our little blend of cultures, maybe with a couple of concessions to the taste of a 10-year-old and her dad. But you know, underneath it all, I think there's still that lingering flavor of Mexico. Cheers. You like that?
I like that.